but released in history. But the reality is, when you're speaking on this, you got to know your facts. That's just point blank. So dealing with me, my mother moved to Texas around when I was 3 or 4 years old. So we've been here for a while, but it didn't take away some of our culture, because my grandfather moved here right behind us by force, like I stated, and lost a lot of land because of the state ruling in the Indian Territory. We lost a whole lot. It wasn't sold, it was stolen. And this stuff is still active today, and it's still in courts and stuff like that. The reality is, people don't want to be caught, people don't want to be deal with it, because at the end of the day, every 100 years they cover up stuff. So it's recorded in the Department of Archives and about our family, their family names, their roll numbers, and everything. But some had non-enrollees. So just because one person didn't have a roll number didn't mean that they wasn't documented. So my grandfather was documented because he was a non-enrollee, but his mother was a full-blood Native American. His father was a Native American as well, from the same tribe. But see, where it comes to is in the 60s, a lot of fraudulent changing of blood quantums, of if your skin tone was a certain color, and if you had certain features, they automatically clumped you into freedmen. That's just one way. There was other ways. Yes, they say that it was people that was slaves, free slaves and stuff like that, but it was more than that out in there. If you go to the dolls, it'll give you the index about why they did what they did. Why they did what they did, even with the names. I can find that my great-grandmother, her name was listed under her father as Ada Tiller on one of the old Indian records. Then you can go and find her under Ada Childers, under Beaver, Ada Williams, different names. This is recorded information. This is a full-blood Native American. Now, if she's my great-grandmother, my grandfather was the last living, he died in 1996, okay? And before he died, I was old enough to hear a lot of his stories, just like me and my brother and other relatives that know that it was true. And we still have 2 living elders, which is his daughters, that's still living today. The other siblings are deceased. But reality is, I'm going to move it forward to what occurred in Dallas, Texas. The issue is racism. Racism did exist, but my mother wasn't familiar with it until she moved to Texas. And I'm going to tell you a little of her story so you can understand how I feel and how I was shaped and molded. My mother didn't experience. She was the only brown skin. The rest of them was maybe an ivory tone. She was, by my skin complexion, not too dark and not light, not too light, not, just in that in-between haze. But her other siblings and her brother was near her skin tone, but her other older sister was a little bit lighter, because you have 2 parents. Well, people forget that you have 2 sides of parents, and you can't skip one without the other one. Sometimes you go generation back, your kids will get something from way back. But anyway, let me move forward, because we can be stuck on DNA all day long. But reality, moving to Texas, it was her first experience in 1976, around 76, when she was pregnant with my baby sister. Her racism experience is that she wasn't around where there was black restrooms, white water, and all that black water. She was not around that in Oklahoma. And so moving to Texas was more of a culture shock, because she tried to go in and purchase some popcorn, and they refused her popcorn. That's the first time she experienced racism. That's her experience. Now, being in Oklahoma, she never did understand. She attended black schools, but she didn't live on the side where blacks live, because her family had land, and she was considered as a Native American, just like her father and mother. Okay, later on in life, her best friend talked to her, Miss Forrestine talked to her, bless her soul, she rests in heaven. She stated that she never did understand why she had to go out the back door, and she would notice that it was okay for my mom to go in the front door. Well, during that time, my mother was a brown-skinned person. She was still documented as not a Native American, and her father worked at this store, and so they didn't have any problems because they lived in the community because they was already documented. And so her friend was just crying. My mother was crying because she did not have a clue that racism was that deep, because she was sheltered in her own community. She didn't know what they were dealing with as Native Americans, but she really didn't know it because she was too young to understand it. Now, fast forward to me. She had the opportunity, even when she was young, to go to schools with different kinds of, what you would call different kinds of careers, trades. She participated in everything in Muskogee, Oklahoma. She participated in everything, nursing, she did it all when she was in high school. And so that may be the reason why she kind of guided me and my brother on the path. So we ended up moving to Dallas, and probably around 68, 69 we were here. So she was always putting us in Catholic schools to better our education. It was always something that was different. She didn't stop us from going to black schools, because we did attend black schools as well. But in high school, me and my brother chose a diverse high school. A diverse high school which consists of all nationalities. So I'm kind of shaped and molded different, and my mindset different. But my mindset was not that different where I didn't go back and learn about black culture, because I did attend a historical black college as well. In order to embrace everything, it's better to educate yourself on all diverse levels to be able to understand the mindset of everyone. So I had an opportunity to be in a lot of the trades. I had an opportunity. The school that I attended was a career development center. So she always kept us engaged in diverse situations instead of a one-track mind situation or one experience. So I'm not going to say, I'm going to even roll it back down. Even when it was the time they was school busing, I'm that era that there was school busing. And I remembered I was the only child in the household on that same street in that whole neighborhood in West Dallas attending David G. Burnett, that would get on the bus at a stop at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch the bus around 6 o'clock in the morning to be all the way in Farmers Branch, Texas, living in West Dallas. I don't know why I had to get up so early. And I was the only little girl. And I probably was in the third grade, then second or third grade, going to David G. Burnett elementary school. It was another school that had a lot of activities. Those activities consist of piano, gymnastics, and everything. And I'm not understanding why I'm the only one in this class by myself if it's PE class, and why but my mother paid for the piano classes, and you know, I just was wondering, because I was bused to this European school. So, but my experience in class, I was still in a setting with all the European, and I was the only considered, even though my mother put Native American on paper, but I was the only one that was considered as a black person. In school, I was documented as Native American. On all my documents, that's all I ever put on there. And my mother put on there. So if anything was changed, it was changed by whoever was registered, and usually it was always either someone of color. But neither here or there. I remember sitting in class, and a little Caucasian girl with blonde hair, she's a cute little girl. She just kept on, she called me nigger for the first time I ever heard of that term, because it wasn't in my household. And I don't think I knew how to respond, because I was smarter than whip, because my mother didn't expose us to the TV. We did not know what was going on during that time. And so I said, and I'll take your boyfriend, and you won't have one. She just busts out crying. I never know why she crying, but whatever I said enough to get her off of my back of call the name. I wasn't gonna let nobody call my name. That was just my personality makeup, regardless of defending myself. But that was my first experience of it. But it's not that my mother dwelt on it or talk about it or anything like that, because we did not. My mother waited till I was in high school to mention what she had experienced at the popcorn station, at the downtown theater, not the popcorn station. The downtown theater denied her popcorn. So my first experience was doing busing, and I really didn't grasp what was going on. The only thing I knew was I was smart at the mouth, and whatever you said, I had something to say back. But later on, I didn't understand at that time why I was the only one on that bus stop. Me and my brother was the only one in the whole neighborhood that was bused. Now on his bus, he said it was a couple of more black students, but I was the only child that was on that bus in the morning going to Farmers Branch to David G. Burnett. I remember that very vividly because it was so dark. Early in the morning, it was real dark. Whew, it was dark. But anyway, that's just one of the situations. So my mother started slowly telling me different little things, but if she had not married her husband, we would never been exposed to it, because he was more knowledgeable about African American stuff. And so if it wasn't him, we would have never known about Juneteenth or anything. All things that's dealing with blacks, we give it to our stepfather, Ivory Anderson. They used to call him IV because he was a musician back in the day with some big time people, but he was a trumpet player. And we would not have been educated about that unless we had went to school, but we wouldn't have been exposed, because what happened is he ended up moving us to Dallas. He was from East Texas. I can't think of the area right now, but he was from East Texas. But he met my mother in Amarillo, Texas. And the reason they were in Amarillo, Texas before, when I was very young, because I was born there, is because all her siblings married husbands that were in the service. Their husbands were military men, so that changed and shifted the family to Texas, basically. Other than, as well as the situation with my grandfather that's ended up moving and following his children because he didn't have a choice. He tried to stay in Oklahoma, but they were stealing his checks, and that the tribe was sending him, as well as his other benefits. So it was a big old mess. And all this documented is not hearsay. But at the end of the day, racism exists even with your own people. And I can say this even with my grandfather. My grandfather would say when it came to his land, it was not just the Europeans. It was Spanish, it was European, as well as blacks. He didn't sugarcoat it, because at the end of the day, sometimes you have people as corrupt no matter what race you are, and that's what people don't want to talk about. They always want to point fingers at everybody, but as soon as someone comes to tell the truth, that's a neutral ground, to be honest. Yes, you can find it in Native Americans, you can find it in blacks, you can find it in those that don't like the term black, African American. You can find it in European or Caucasian, whichever one you prefer, because two races I know that is lost is European and blacks, African Americans, because they come from all diverse cultures. They just clueless, and people get offended, but you don't know who your tribe is. You don't know where your origination. You would hear things people saying, "Oh, got burned." No, none of that stuff they're dealing with the federal government or state got burned. They just put it away that it wasn't your access, and they waiting 100 years where it would be useless to fight in court. That's factual. And that they know that people don't have the money to invest, or they have limited amount of money that they can invest to a certain time, and then it goes stagnated, or they lose the case because they don't have the right type of lawyers. That's just true facts. Now, reality is about this racism stuff. You can find it in all nationalities. I can say this, one festival, and you got to keep in mind, people that works for Native American organizations, tribal organizations, they are not Native American all the time. They're just regular workers, because laws were passed that the tribe had to hire outside outsiders, which would be anybody that's non-Native American. I was standing near the booth because I wanted to update my voters registration with Creek Nation, and the lady that was sitting at the desk was Caucasian. She just assumed that I wasn't. Oh, you can't register here. And the other lady said, no, you can't do that. You don't know what you're talking about. She is a Native American. She's registered. See, people get the color coding and because of their ignorance, because of what they see in front of them. All tribes are mixed up with different skin tones. But just like my grandfather said, you know, it's just a long time ago, it was all tribes intermingling. And he was one that was snatched from his mama and his father, and his mother was murdered. But at the end of the day, when he endured a lot, and when you think about race issues, he didn't point the finger at one person. He pointed at all nationalities, because they all impacted the Native Americans in some kind of way. When it came to land, and money, people gets greedy, and that's what people don't want to talk about. The land you own, you could most likely ask them who land originally was, and they'll say, oh, it used to be this old Indian lady. They knew that they took the land. They know they either killed the person, they either ran them off their land. So if you have a relative that can clearly say, oh, it used to be Native American, you know that they got it illegal, rather through the state. The thing about it, people don't understand that your state is accountability why things are the way they are, but it's also the federal fault because they don't follow through with the treaties that as promised. And so they try to find ways, or they try to convince sometimes the tribes to change laws to eliminate certain people. But I can truly say that I've seen document changes of blood quantums from originally before the dolls was presented. The actual Native Americans was registered, but they voided that document out, and it was clearly stating that there were full-blood Indians. And then there were still documentations up to 1967. You will see where the Interior will implement what you call when a person dies, they have to have a document on file concerning their family. So when you see one document saying that they're full blood, and then later on in life, if the family member remarried, that black woman changed the blood quantum on the full-blooded child. So things were done undermining by using other nationalities. Because at the bottom line, when it comes to certain individuals, not all individuals, if it got something to do with money, land, or some type of profit, people would do dirty things. And that's just about death. Something about death, or something about land and ownership. People will do anything to lie to take something that's not theirs. That's one thing that they have definitely done over decades. So when people talk about they're biracial or whatever, well, we could say the whole world may be biracial, but that's not true to some people. Just because a person lives a certain skin tone don't mean they are what you think they are. I had another incident where dealing with racial identity. I'm going to say racial identity. I'm not going to call the person a racist, but I was dealing with a doctor, and what people don't fail to do, if you know you're Ethiopian, you make them identify you. Or if you know you are Eritrean, you make them identify. If you, whatever tribe you are, you make those people put on your documents who you are. Do not allow them to put black or African American, because that's not what you are. That's not where you come from. You know your history. And a lot of times that is what has happened. I'm going to tell you about this one, because this was recently. I had an Asian doctor. I have an Asian hypertension doctor. And when she was doing her medical notes, you can see all the medical notes now, whatever they write on you. And she wrote that I was African American on there. And even though my medical record said it was Native American, my mother was Native American, everybody was Native American on there, but she just automatically assumed and wrote down. So it offended me a little bit, but because if I can identify myself to a tribe, allow me to identify myself to a tribe. It's not a privilege. It's not a privilege. And so my thing is, I sent a letter, and she had, the nurses and everyone had to apologize because there was not protocol. Because anyone that's identifying you as your nationality in your medical records, instead of identifying you as a person, your name, that's what it should have been wrote. A name, whatever your name is, her diagnosis is. But do not diagnose someone as a race and without verifying who they are. See, misclassification, those documents are important. Any legal documents are important, and medical documents are important. Even when you go to the doctors, they are important. What they put down. That's just like a person know they ill and you putting down that they're from Europe. It's the same concept. They need to be identified where they actually are from. That's the purpose of federal level. That's the difference in federal and state. You have federal, you have rights because they list all your nationalities or continents that you may have come from that you can identify with. But people from time to time get offended. But the neighborhood, I'm going to go back to our neighborhood. The neighborhood we lived in was supposed to be only for African American people. So that's, some people will say that that's discrimination as well. They made a community, and they said it's because during the 70s, they would not allow any Caucasians to ride through the area that my mother had moved to, and my father had moved to. So, but the neighbors that we dealt with, they knew that we were not based on our accent and a different type of skin tone and our culture. And the only person that could identify was my mother's husband, which was my stepfather. And so do not think that African American children didn't pick at us, because they did. If it wasn't talking about the way we talk, your mama sound like a white woman. What are y'all? And then when our relatives came around, what are those white people doing here? The attitude, the anger came. And then later on, when they started understanding that we were Native American, then they was more conscious and cautious. And then when they heard my grandfather speak his native tongue, Musco Creek language, then they began to gravitate and understand why we were different than they were. But when you do that, it encourages others to do studies on themselves to find out who they are. That's all it's about. It's just that we may have not gotten all our culture, but we had enough of it because our grandfather left it behind, and he told us enough for us to understand who we are. And the thing is how African Americans, some African Americans, not all, tend to get more of an attitude than some. And the first thing they'll say, oh, you black, oh, you this, you that. No one's denying that they're black or African, but you got to understand, black and African is not a nationality. It's just a made-up name to make you feel good about yourself. But you should never feel good to be categorized underneath those titles, because it does not lead you back to Africa. It does not lead you back to the USA. It's no tribes. It's no connection. It's no cultural ties. It's made up. It's all fraud. People get offended, but it is. You know, it's changed from color, nigger, negro, black, and African American. That is not a nationality. People get offended, but it is not a nationality. And that's real talk. So realize I have to respect others, even when they get on large platforms and they speak and say, oh, I'm 50% and 50 that. I respect you for wanting to be African American. I respect you from wanting to be Native American. But reality is everyone's DNA reached far back other than African American and as well as Native American. Sometimes when you're dealing with people that is of mixed race, and some people say biracial, mixed race, meaning that they have more than 2 races in their DNA. You can't talk about one without talking about the others. If you're going to talk about one, talk about the breakdown of your African descent, where you originally came from, as well as your native tribes. Because some blacks or some African Americans, they come from more than one tribe. Like my grandfather said, he said a lot of intermingled way before this. It was one nation that they were intermingled, and like my grandfather knew a lot of native tongues, but his primary native tongue was Creek, because they was pretty much coexisting to those that was not hostile towards them. Seminole and Creek are sister tribes, so their language is exact, it's similar. That's how they can coexist. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that the only reason my grandfather he learned and gravitated to all is because he was forced into those boarding schools. They killed his mother, they took their land, and then the man that was leasing the land gave the land back. And then some more European settlers, they was just taking, abusing the system of the state and claiming land that was not there. This went on for decades after decades, and even to decades today, that they still have been doing this, taking land unauthorized under state laws. It's just one of those things that, you got to realize when you know who you are, then you don't have a problem speaking about it. But the only ones offended when they don't have a story to tell, or they telling a story what they're assuming. And a person, 2 women got on there, and I was just explaining my story, and then all of a sudden only a few people got offended because they understood what I was saying. When you have those that want to critique everything, every experience, no one denying it, but at the end of the day, you hollering black, you hollering African. If I have to holler African, I want to know what tribe I came from. I don't want to holler I'm African American and I'm black and I don't know what tribe I come from. But one thing I do know is that I'm Muskogee Creek native, and I know when I registered, that's where my family was run by, and it runs through Seminole and other tribes as well. I'm not going to deny that it may have African American in it as well. It has Caucasian, it has a lot of nationalities. But what I can go by is what I am able to register under. And everyone doesn't have that at all, because they didn't get the guidance, or it wasn't taught, or it was a secret, because they was thought what harm can come to them. So there's many stories. See, a lot of people lost it because the threat, and they will fall under the African Americans because it was their life or survival. So it depends on what type of situation each families were in. Everyone did not go through the Trail of Tears. Unfortunately, I had several families that did. And so at the end of the day, people assume what slavery was for the Native Americans, and they never have talked to every Native American family that had a different story. Every situation is different. Just like you can find some that married into it, it was fine. Some of them said it was a disaster, and unfortunately it was a disaster in our situation. So there's nothing good that I'm gonna sit up here and lie. And I know my grandfather wasn't lying. They took money from him. It was African American, European, and Spanish, because that's who was around him. And you can't deny that, because Spaniards owned Louisiana and other Florida. Spaniards took, do your history on indigenous law, then you'll know more. But if you read in American history, yes, it is wrong. It is written wrong. But if you want to know what actually was put on documents, on records, then you're talking about something. Until then, you just on this channel running your mouth, in my eyesight. But I'm going to respect you. And it's a sad situation that none of us have learned that you should not be judgmental, or you should not stereotype people without knowing who they really are. Sometimes it's best to say less than say anything at all. Sometimes it's best to keep it to yourself. But if someone's trying to share, don't get offended because they have a different story than you, or they see something different that you can't see. Because rest assured, I've been researching for a long time, and I got all my family documents. And the best thing I can tell to any new person that's trying to find their history, When you get that information, make sure you get it certified. Each document, no matter how old it is, that's authenticated. Get it on court document, recorded, get it certified. That's the tip. Because anybody can tell a story, but if they ain't got no facts, it's just a story that's passed down to different people. But when people go fact finding, make sure it's valid and that it matches up. That's all I'm saying. But do not count people out because they're making comments in the same on your post. If you have a problem with people comments or what they went through, it's easy to reach out to the person and ask them to do a clear video to get you understanding what they're saying. Because a lot of times it's so much information that the person have, and it's very impossible to get everything that they want to tell you about what actually happened. They can only tell you synopsis of what happened. So don't be so quick on the tongue and going in hard on something that you don't have no knowledge or you didn't go through. That's all I'm saying. Just stay positive, and to everyone, because everyone has been through something. No matter what culture, what nationality in, everybody have went through something one time in their life. So hopefully you enjoyed my YouTube video, and please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button.